"Stay away from me! I'm a killer!" The scarred fugitive warned the fat girl, but she saw the gentle soul behind his scars. The moonless night hung heavy over Millbrook, a small frontier town swallowed by snow and silence. Somewhere in the pines, a fugitive hid from the world a man everyone called the Butcher of Henderson Farm. His name was Silas Kane. Tall, broad, and burned by fire long ago, his face was a map of scars, deep ridges along his cheek, an old gash over his brow and charred skin along his jaw. To anyone who saw him, he was a monster. To himself, he was just a man running out of places to hide. The wanted posters read, $500 reward for the capture of Silas Kane, murderer. But Silas knew the truth. He had never killed anyone. That night, hunger forced him closer to the town that hated him. He crept through the trees toward the dim glow of the Millbrook Tavern, and that's when he heard it, a woman's scream. Under the lantern's flickering light, a mob of drunken men surrounded a young woman. She was heavy-set, with wild red curls and terrified green eyes. Her name was Rosalind Murphy, but they called her Fat Rosie behind her back. "Please," she cried, as the tavern owner Harold Briggs shoved her into the dirt. "I didn't steal anything." "Liar," Harold bellowed. "You think I don't see you slipping food to those brats at the orphan house? You eat half of it yourself." The crowd laughed cruel, heartless laughter. "Teach her a lesson," someone shouted. Harold's boot struck her ribs. Silas watched from the shadows, rage burning through him. Every instinct screamed stay hidden, but something stronger than fear broke his stillness. When the men finally dragged Rosalind outside the town gates and left her bleeding in the snow, Silas emerged from the trees. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her lips blue with cold. "Don't touch me," she whispered weakly when she saw his face. "I know what I am," he said, his voice low and rough. "A killer. That's what they call me." He crouched beside her, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he lifted her from the ground. "But I won't let them finish what they started." And so the scarred fugitive carried the outcast girl into the darkness, toward the one place left in the world where both monsters and angels could still exist. When Rosalind Rose Murphy woke, she thought she had died. The first thing she saw wasn't heaven, but firelight, flickering across rough stone walls. Her head throbbed, her ribs ached, and her throat felt dry as ash. The smell of smoke and pine filled the air. Then she saw him. The man sitting by the fire looked like a nightmare carved into flesh. His face was torn by scars, skin melted and puckered from old burns, one eye half clouded, the other dark and fierce. His shirt was tattered, his hands covered in soot and blood. When he noticed she was awake, he didn't move closer. He just said, in a low, careful voice, "Don't scream. I won't hurt you." Rose tried to push herself up, but pain shot through her body. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Silas Kane," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be here." Her heart froze. Everyone in Millbrook knew that name. The Butcher of Henderson Farm, the killer with the burned face. She stared at him in horror. You killed them." His jaw tightened. "That's what they say." "Then why did you bring me here?" He hesitated, his gaze steady, but tired. "Because I couldn't leave you to die." Silence settled between them, heavy as the mountain snow outside. The fire popped. Somewhere deep in the forest, a wolf howled. "Where am I?" Rose asked. "My shelter," Silas said. "A cave. I've lived here since they put a price on my head." She looked around. It wasn't just a cave, it was a home. There was a cot made from pine branches, furs neatly arranged near the fire, and tin cups hung on hooks hammered into the wall. Despite its roughness, everything was clean and ordered. "Why help me?" she asked again, her voice trembling. He looked away, into the flames. "Because once I needed help too. No one came. For 2 days, Rose could barely move. Fever burned through her from the bruises and cuts Harold Briggs had left. Silas stayed silent most of the time, fetching water, cooking broth over the fire, cutting cloth into bandages. He never touched her without warning, never came too close. Yet she noticed the small things, the way he turned his face when she looked at him, as if ashamed of being seen, the way he left food by her side before taking his share last, the way he covered her with his own coat at night when the fire dimmed. On the 3rd day, when she tried to thank him, her voice cracked. "You should have let me die. You're risking your life for nothing." He finally met her eyes. "Maybe saving someone makes me feel human again." That night, Rose couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, snow whipping against the cave mouth. She lay under the blanket, watching Silas mend a broken knife near the fire. His scarred hands moved with quiet precision, his shoulders broad beneath his shirt. "Silas," she whispered. He looked up. "I don't believe you killed anyone." His expression flickered shock, pain, disbelief. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why?" "Because no one ever does." Rose sat up, ignoring the ache in her ribs. "Then they're blind. I can see it in your eyes. You don't have the eyes of a murderer." For the first time, Silas smiled. It was faint, small, and uncertain, but real. And in that moment, something shifted in the cold mountain air, something fragile and human, like a spark that refused to die. Days turned into weeks, and the cave that had once felt like a tomb slowly began to feel like a home. Each morning, the sound of fire crackling blended with the soft rustle of snow falling outside. Silas would rise before dawn, leaving quietly to hunt or set traps, returning hours later with rabbits, roots, or sometimes nothing at all. Rose, though still recovering, insisted on helping. "I can't just lie here while you do everything," she said one morning, trying to stand. "You're still hurt," he replied, slicing wood for the fire. "I'm not useless," she snapped, wincing at the pain but refusing to sit down. Silas paused, then handed her a small knife and a bundle of herbs. "Then start by cutting these. We'll make soup." That was how it began, small acts of stubborn pride that turned into shared routine. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, steam rising from a pot of rabbit stew. Rose would hum softly old Irish folk songs her mother once sang. Silas would listen in silence, eyes distant but peaceful. "You used to be a blacksmith, didn't you?" she asked one night. He nodded slowly. "In Millbrook, before the fire." "The fire that gave you those scars?" "Yes, I heard screams from the Hendersons' house. I went in to help, but—" He hesitated, his hand unconsciously brushing the side of his face. "The roof collapsed. I carried out their son, but he didn't survive. The sheriff found me covered in soot and blood. They didn't ask questions." Rose stared into the flames. "They judged you because of your face." He gave a bitter chuckle. "The world doesn't need proof when it already sees a monster." The following week, Rose insisted on going outside. The air was crisp, sunlight breaking through the trees. Silas followed, always a few steps behind, watching carefully as she gathered firewood and herbs. At one point, Her foot slipped on the ice. Silas caught her before she fell, his hands firm on her arms. For a moment, they froze, her soft breath mixing with his, her heart pounding in her chest. "Thank you," she murmured. He stepped back quickly, eyes dark. "Don't thank me. You shouldn't even be near me." "Why not?" she asked. "Because people say you're dangerous?" He clenched his fists. "Because I am. I've seen what happens when people get close to me." She looked at him steadily. "Then maybe it's time someone proved you wrong." That night, as the storm raged outside, Rose woke to find the fire nearly dead. Silas was sitting up, staring into the dark. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nightmares. Every time I close my eyes, I see the flames." She reached for his hand, hesitating before her fingers brushed his scarred knuckles. "You saved me from those men. That fire may have burned your skin, but it didn't touch your soul." Silas swallowed hard. No one had ever spoken to him like that. He turned to her, his voice rough with emotion. "You shouldn't look at me like that, Rose." "Like what?" "Like I'm not broken." She smiled softly. "That's because you aren't." Outside, the wind howled across the mountains. But inside the cave, two souls scarred by cruelty found warmth not just from the fire, but from each other. Each passing day, the line between savior and companion blurred until the silence between them carried more meaning than words. And though neither dared to speak it yet, both knew something had begun that neither the law nor the cold world outside could ever extinguish. The winter storms finally began to ease, and with them came a quiet thaw, not just in the mountains, but in Silas Kane's heart. One morning, as pale sunlight slipped through the trees, Silas stood at the cave entrance, watching Rose pack the last of the dried meat and herbs. Her face still bore faint bruises, but her spirit, the stubborn fire in her green eyes, was burning brighter than ever. "You said this cave wasn't meant for two," she said gently. "Where will we go now?" He hesitated, then nodded toward the ridge. "There's a cabin. I built it before the fire, before everything changed. It's not much, but it's a roof." Rose smiled. "Then let's go home." The journey took half a day through melting snow and slush. When they finally reached it, Rose's breath caught. The cabin stood in a clearing surrounded by pines, its roof sagging, chimney cracked, and porch covered in moss. But beneath the decay, she saw the soul of it, strong, patient, enduring. Silas pushed the door open. Dust floated in beams of light like ghosts of the past. Tools still hung neatly on the wall. A rusted horseshoe lay by the hearth. He stood silently, his scarred hand resting on the doorframe. "I built this for my wife." Rose froze. You were married?" He nodded. "Her name was Clara. She died in the fire. I couldn't save her." The silence between them deepened. Rose could see it, the grief carved into him like another scar. She wanted to speak, to comfort him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she began sweeping the floor, clearing away years of dust and regret. "Why are you doing that?" he asked softly. "Because if we're going to live here," she said without looking up, "we should start by making it livable again." For the first time in years, Silas let someone stay. As days passed, they repaired the cabin together. She patched curtains from old fabric. He fixed the roof and built new chairs. When the fireplace finally came to life again, it filled the room with a soft orange glow warmth against a world that had given them nothing but cold. One evening, Rose cooked stew while Silas sharpened his tools. The air was filled with the scent of thyme and roasted rabbit. "This feels like peace," she murmured. "It won't last," he replied quietly. "They'll come looking for me again. Men like me don't get peace." Rose turned, meeting his eyes. "Then I'll fight for it with you." He almost smiled, but something in her tone made him pause. "You've fought before, haven't you?" She froze, spoon trembling in her hand. "What do you mean?" "The way you move, the way you never flinch when you hear shouting. You've lived with danger." For a long time she said nothing. Then, with a shaky breath, she confessed, "I killed a man." Silas looked up sharply. "It was a year ago," she said, voice trembling. "The tavern owner before Harold Briggs, his name was Thomas Wade. He used to touch me. One night he tried to force me. I hit him with a bottle, and he fell. The sheriff said it was self-defense, but no one in town ever saw me the same again. That's why Harold thought he could own me, because everyone believed I was a murderer." Her eyes glistened with tears. "Now you know what I am." Silas stood and crossed the room slowly. His scarred face was unreadable. Then he said softly, "No, Rose. Now I know you're the only person who could ever understand me." She let out a trembling laugh, half relief, half disbelief. Two killers, hiding from the world. He brushed his thumb across her cheek. No, two survivors. That night they sat side by side on the porch, watching the stars return to the sky. The air was cold, but neither of them felt it. For the first time, Rose rested her head against his shoulder, and Silas didn't pull away. Somewhere deep within him, a truth stirred terrifying and tender all at once. He had saved her life, and now, without realizing it, she was saving his. The peace they built didn't last. It never does, not for people like them. Spring brought thawing rivers, green shoots, and whispers that the fat, red-haired girl from Millbrook wasn't dead after all, that someone had seen her near the ridge, walking beside a burned-faced man. By the time the rumor reached Sheriff Morrison's ears, it was already too late for silence. He and Harold Briggs rode out with 3 armed deputies at dawn, the frost still clinging to their coats, the lawless glint of greed in their eyes. Morrison didn't care about justice. He cared about bounty. Harold cared about revenge. Inside the cabin, Rose was mending a torn shirt when she heard the distant thunder of hooves. Silas froze by the window, his jaw tightening. "They found us." Her sewing needle slipped from her hand. "What do we do?" He reached for his rifle. "You stay here. If I don't come back—" "No." She rose, shaking her head. "I won't hide while you bleed for me again." "Rose." "I said no, Silas." Her voice was steady now. "We face them together." For a long moment he just looked at her. The fear in her eyes was real, but so was the fire. Then he nodded. "All right. Together." When the riders appeared at the tree line, Silas stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung across his shoulder, every inch the outlaw they wanted him to be. "Well, look at that," Harold sneered. "The beast keeps a pet now." Rose stepped out behind Silas. "And you're still a coward who hides behind men with guns." Harold's smile faltered. "You should have stayed in the dirt where we left you." "She lived because I pulled her out," Silas growled. "And if you try to touch her again, you'll go back to town in a box." The sheriff raised his hand. "We can do this easy or hard, Kane. Surrender, and maybe we'll let the girl go." Rose stepped forward before Silas could answer. "You mean like you let go of the Hendersons? Or like you let go of their money after you killed them?" The deputies shifted uneasily. Morrison's face went pale. Silas blinked at her. "Rose, what are you?" She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, a letter sealed with the Henderson family crest. "I found this in your old forge when we cleaned it. It's a deed proof the sheriff forged their will to claim their land. It's over, Morrison." The sheriff's composure cracked. "Get them!" he shouted. Gunfire shattered the morning calm. Silas fired back, his rifle thundering. Rose ducked behind the porch rail, reloading with trembling hands. A bullet grazed Silas's arm. Another splintered the doorpost beside Rose's head. She screamed his name. "I'm fine!" he yelled, firing again. 2 deputies went down. Harold charged forward, shouting curses, only to meet the butt of Silas's rifle with a sickening crack. Then silence. Smoke drifted through the clearing. Morrison, bleeding and cornered, tried to raise his gun again. Rose stepped from behind Silas, steady as stone. "Don't," she said. "Not this time." He hesitated, and she fired. 1 shot, straight through his badge. When it was over, the snow around the cabin was flecked with blood and pine needles. Silas stood breathing hard, his shirt torn and stained crimson. Rose dropped the pistol, shaking. He caught her before she fell. "You did it," he whispered. "We did," she breathed back, tears in her eyes. He looked down at her, this woman who had been beaten, cast out, left for dead, and felt something inside him break open. "I spent my whole life running from the world," he said softly, "and somehow you found me anyway." Rose cupped his scarred face in her hands. "I didn't find you, Silas. I saw you." Then, before fear or reason could stop them, she kissed him fierce, trembling, and real. By the time the sun rose fully over the ridge, the danger had passed. The sheriff's men were gone. The cabin stood, scarred, but standing much like the 2 souls inside it. They had won more than survival that morning. They had won the right to stop hiding. By the time the snow melted and the valley bloomed again, news had spread far and wide. Sheriff Morrison was dead, and the monster of Millbrook, Silas Kane, had survived. Some called it murder. Others whispered justice. But Silas and Rose knew there would be no peace until the truth stood in the open, even if that meant walking straight back into the jaws of the town that had condemned them both. They arrived in Millbrook on a bright spring morning. The streets were busier than usual. Wagons creaked, shopkeepers shouted, children pointed from the windows. "Look," someone hissed. "That's him, the killer." "No," another said. "That's the girl he took, the fat one. She's still alive?" Every whisper cut through Rose like a knife, but she held her head high. Her arm brushed Silas's as they walked toward the courthouse. He was stiff, alert, one hand resting on the rifle slung across his back. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes, I do," he replied. "If I keep hiding, they win." Inside the courthouse, Judge Holloway nearly dropped his spectacles when they entered. "Silas Kane, you got a lot of nerve showing your face here." "I'm not here to beg," Silas said firmly. "I'm here to clear my name." The judge laughed dryly. "You were found guilty by half this town. What could possibly change that now?" Rose stepped forward and placed a small bundle of papers on the judge's desk. Evidence. The room went silent as she spread them out. Morrison's signed confessions, the forged deed from the Henderson estate, and a letter from Reverend Dalton confirming the sheriff's extortion schemes. Holloway's expression shifted from disbelief to shame. "Good Lord! You're saying Morrison and Briggs murdered the Hendersons and blamed it on Kane?" "Yes," Rose said, "because he was easy to blame." The judge leaned back, rubbing his temples. This changes everything. An emergency hearing was called that afternoon. The courthouse filled to the brim, farmers, merchants, gossiping women clutching handkerchiefs. All of them had once called Silas a monster. Now he stood before them again, taller than most, scarred but unflinching. When the judge announced the verdict, Silas Kane exonerated of all charges, a stunned silence filled the room. Then, from somewhere in the back, an old woman began to clap. Others followed. Soon the courthouse echoed with applause and murmurs of apology. Rose turned to him, tears in her eyes. "It's over." Silas shook his head slowly. "No, not over. But maybe it's beginning." After the hearing, townspeople approached hesitantly, the same ones who had spat at him, thrown stones, called him names. A young boy tugged his mother's hand. "Mama, that's the man who saved the lady, right?" The woman nodded. "Yes, son, that's him." For the first time in years, Silas didn't feel like a ghost walking through his own life. That night, the town's blacksmith shop burned with light again, not from fire, but from purpose. Silas's forge had reopened, with Rose beside him, sorting tools and laughing when sparks flew too high. "You look happy," she said. "I don't remember what that feels like," he admitted. "But I think I could get used to it." 1 week later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Reverend Dalton stood before the townsfolk at the small chapel. "Today," he announced, "we gather not for sorrow, but for forgiveness." The congregation turned as Silas Kane entered, his hand in Rose's. She wore a simple blue dress, no lace, no jewels, just dignity and light. When they stood before the altar, Dalton smiled. "You both have walked through fire quite literally and somehow came out whole. Do you, Silas Kane, take this woman, Rosalind Murphy, as your wife?" Silas's scarred face softened. "I already have." "And do you, Rose, take this man, scars and all, as your husband?" She smiled through tears. Scars and all. When Dalton declared them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. No one laughed at her sighs. No one flinched at his scars. Outside, as the bells rang, Silas lifted Rose into his arms. "We made it," she whispered against his chest. He kissed her forehead. "No, Rose, we built it." That evening, they returned to their cabin. The porch lantern glowed against the twilight, the forest whispering softly around them. Silas stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You remember what I said the night I found you?" She smiled faintly. "You told me to stay away." He chuckled. "Worst advice I ever gave." "Then what would you tell me now?" she asked, turning to face him. He brushed a strand of red hair from her face. "Stay. Forever." A full year passed, and the cabin that once stood as a refuge for 2 hunted souls became the heart of something new, a home. Spring rolled gently into summer, bringing life back to the valley. The pine trees shimmered green again. Deer came to graze near the stream, and laughter began to echo where silence once ruled. Every morning, Silas rose before the sun. His forge now stood strong again, rebuilt from blackened ruins into a place of pride. Smoke curled from its chimney as he worked the iron-shaping horseshoes, hinges, and plows for the farmers who once feared him. No one called him Monster anymore. They called him Mr. Kane, the best smith west of Millbrook. And every afternoon, when the ringing of his hammer faded, he would glance up the hill toward the little schoolhouse that Rose had dreamed into being. It wasn't grand, just a single-room building painted white, with rows of mismatched desks and a tiny bell by the door. But it was alive. Inside, Rose stood before a group of wide-eyed children orphans, half-breeds, and the ones too poor to be welcomed elsewhere. Her laughter filled the air as she guided small hands tracing letters on chalkboards. "Remember," she told them, smiling, "your worth isn't written on your faces or your bodies or your names. It's written in what you do for others." The children nodded, some giggling, some whispering to each other. On the wall behind her hung a small plaque, built by Silas and Rose Kane for the lost, the brave, and the kind. That evening, as twilight fell, Silas came to meet her. He stood in the doorway, arms folded, soot still on his hands. "You've got ink on your cheek," he said with a teasing smile. She laughed, wiping it with the back of her hand. "And you've got half the forge on yours." He chuckled, walking closer. "Seems we make a fine mess together." Rose tilted her head. "A beautiful mess." They locked the door and began the short walk home, hand in hand. The air smelled of pine and warm soil. In the distance, the mountains glowed gold beneath the setting sun. At the cabin, Silas lit the lantern while Rose poured soup into 2 bowls. They sat on the porch steps, shoulders touching, watching the stars appear one by one. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked quietly. "Every day," he admitted. "But now I remember it without hate." "And the scars?" He smiled faintly. "They don't burn anymore." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's because you let someone love the man behind them." Silas turned to her, voice low and steady. "You didn't just love me, Rose. You saved me." She looked up, eyes glistening in the lantern light. "We saved each other." A soft wind swept through the clearing, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Somewhere nearby, an owl called. Silas reached for her hand and pressed it against his chest. "You hear that?" he said. She smiled. "Your heart." "It used to be silent," he whispered, "until you brought it back to life." Rose's eyes softened. "Then let's make sure it never forgets how to beat." As the stars bloomed overhead, the two sat wrapped in each other's warmth, no longer fugitives, no longer outcasts. Just 2 souls who had turned pain into purpose and fear into love. And as the night deepened, the light from their cabin glowed softly through the trees, a beacon for anyone lost in the dark, just as they once were. The snow had melted, the guns had fallen silent, and somewhere deep in the Wyoming wilderness, 2 forgotten people built a life that no one thought possible. Silas Kane, once called the Scarred Killer, now forged iron and peace in equal measure. Rosalind Murphy, once mocked as the fat girl, now taught children to read, dream, and believe they mattered. Together, they rewrote their stories not in ink, but in kindness. Their scars, their shame, their losses all became threads in a single tapestry of love that no judgment could tear apart. Because in the end, what truly saves a soul isn't beauty, power, or revenge. It's mercy. It's courage. It's the moment someone looks into your brokenness and says, "You're not too far gone. You're enough, just as you are." If you're still listening to this story, wherever you are in the world, maybe from a small town, a city apartment, or somewhere far in the mountains, remember this. You are not defined by what people say about you. You are defined by what you choose to rise from. Every scar has a story, every outcast has a reason, and every heart, no matter how bruised, deserves to be seen, to be loved, and to be believed in again. So tell me, my friend, Where are you listening from tonight? And do you still believe that love can find even the most lost souls?